Welcome to the Femininja Project. I am your host, Cheryl I Love, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the Femininja Project. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Femininja Project, and thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. We have an amazing guest today who is going to talk about a very important subject with us. Her name is Katie Gilbertson. She is a licensed mental health professional, a woman's advocate, the founder and owner of Rainy Day Therapy, and the host of the Shame Rebel podcast. Katie's work focuses on boundaries, shame, self-esteem, relationships, and trauma. Her private practice is a safe place for all genders, sexual orientation, and ethnicities, where she supports people to break out of their own shame, suffering, and limitations. Katie, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm just delighted that you're here. And, wow, what a topic, huh?
Yeah, it can be as specific or as broad as you can think. So,
and I think it's pretty all encompassing too. I think when somebody hears the word shame, everybody's like, oh, yeah, I kind of know what you're talking about. So we all have experienced it. But I would really like to ask you if you could share your story of how you found this path, this career path of going into, mental health and being an advocate for women and some of the issues that they deal with, especially around the topic of shame.
Sure. Well, I would say that for the longest time growing up, I didn't know kind of what shame was, or like I would feel it, but I didn't know what to name it. And eventually I got more familiar with it when I went to my own counseling, and then got into therapy school, and they kind of drill it in there. So for the longest time, I just didn't have an understanding of these feelings I was having of inadequacy and kind of what to label that as or what to do with that. And then I started to get some answers as I processed things in my own therapy and in therapy school. And then at a certain point in my own practice, I was hearing stories of shame all the time. And I was like, you know what? This has got to be my niche, because everyone's affected by it in different ways and in similar ways. And I think if we could hone in on shame, it would kind of alleviate a lot of stuff for people. And so then I branched out into podcasting and created Shame Rebel just to do that. So
how long have you had your podcast?
Let's see. I don't even know if it's been a year yet. So it's brand new still.
Oh, how exciting though.
Yeah.
And again, what an important subject to talk about. And, you talk about things like, body shaming and a variety of different types of shaming. Just talk a little bit about that, because body shaming, to me, that's one that I think, especially for women, we really have a hard time with, and we experience it. And a lot of times it comes from, maybe what we see as the perfect body, the perfect woman. And a lot of times it comes from what we tell ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my I call it body healing journey started 2 years ago when I just kind of, I think I met up with providers who did like body food work with clients in a bunch of different ways. And I was networking to try to start my business. And I came in contact with a dietitian. And while I was chatting with her, she was like, I work with providers, and so I actually became her client and worked through some of my own stuff. And what I found was there is so much that we learn and internalize and just kind of soak in with the world around us and with our families and our, just all our connections, that a lot of the shame I was having around body stuff in particular, I didn't even realize I had. And then it just kind of started to unravel as we pulled at one string on that shame sweater. And yeah, and it just went from there. So
I'm going to rename that. I'm going to call it the sweater of shame.
there we go.
Because I really like that. And I'm a knitter. I haven't knit for several years now, and there's a long story why not. But it was one of the things I love to do was knit and create something beautiful. So I know exactly what you're talking about when that one stitch is dropped and everything starts to unravel slowly, but surely. It all falls apart.
Yeah, and for me, it started with, oh my goodness, I'm trying to think of some of her early questions. Like it was simple questions like, tell me what kind of foods you ate when you were growing up, or what do you, if you cook at home, what kind of things do you cook? Like it was really simple questions, but then she would just blow my mind in how that relates to my body shame. So an example would be, for me, when I was growing up, my parents we would eat out more often than we would eat at home. And so there's shame there around the types of food I was eating, but I never connected that, even though I might feel more like I'm not happy with my body, or I don't feel good in my body, or things like that. You break those messages down into smaller pieces, and you can go as small as, what was your relationship with food like when you were growing up? So
wow, pretty fascinating. So it's not necessarily the body that you're looking in the mirror and the body that you see. It's actually more about the relationship.
Yeah, and there's lots of I'm a very visual person, so I always think of it as like a tree, right? And for me, with a lot of issues, the trunk is often shame, and then it branches out into different ways, and there could be a big branch that's body shame, and then a bunch of mini branches or leaves that come off that are in these different areas. So I never ever thought I had shame around food in particular. But then when we started diving into some of these things, I was like, oh, I could see how that's all related.
And I want to take it a little bit deeper, because you're talking about, the mental health issues of shame and how it impacts us, how we feel about ourselves. And I mean, that permeates every single aspect of our lives, our relationships, even our work that we do, everything. And it also impacts our physical health.
Sure.
So could you address that at all? And talk about the physical aspects of what shame can do to us?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the hardest parts when I start working with clients around shame is that if they don't notice what they're feeling in their body when shame is present, you can't really do anything with it. So part of it is looking at kind of, what does shame feel like? Like, do you feel it in your chest? Do you feel it in your gut? Like, what are the physical symptoms of shame? And then if you're not noticing that that's happening, it's very similar to stress, where those kinds of feelings or hormones will just kind of sit in your body, and over time can develop into depression or anxiety. I think a lot of people that have like gut health issues struggle with shame in that way. So it can go into kind of, I don't know, like, I keep thinking of the word stuck. Like if it's stuck in your body, you might feel stuck in life, kind of that kind of thing.
And so how do you get people unstuck? Because, I work more with movement, because that's something that I understand and I'm comfortable with. But I really understand the emotional and psychological aspect of being stuck. And how do you approach that? I mean, how do you help people get out of that stuckedness? And I just made that word up.
Yeah. I really think the first part is just growing awareness of, again, how those negative feelings are in your body. With shame in particular, I think sometimes it can get confused with guilt or anger. It definitely rides the coattails of those feelings sometimes, but it's its own thing too. So I think awareness is key. And then once you have awareness, you can kind of do certain things to start breaking out of that shame. One example that I do a lot in my therapy work is teaching people boundaries. And that's something that I also had to learn, because a lot of my insecurities or feelings of inadequacy was because I wasn't speaking up for myself. So boundaries is a really great tool for combating shame.
Boundaries are just absolutely huge. And I didn't realize how, let's just say, porous my boundaries were until I was hitting like about 50. And then, through a lot of issues that I was having personally, that kind of led to exploring other things. And a friend of mine actually gave me a book on boundaries. And she gave it to me because her therapist recommended it for her. And so she bought me a copy and gave it to me and said, well, you can read the book and just give me the take-home points.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, there's a boundary. That's one of the, that's my first lesson in really creating strong boundaries.
Sure.
And so that was I thought it was just really funny. It was kind of like so ridiculous, it's like, okay, we do have a problem here.
I know. I joke that one of these years for Christmas, I'm just going to gift everybody a self-help book and just call it good,
Well, I have another idea. Why don't you write the self-help book?
Oh my goodness, if I had the time.
Well, you don't have to do it all at one sitting.
True. That is true. Yeah.
Yes. It's like knitting those sweaters. Go back to the knitting. I like to say that writing a book is like knitting with words.
Yeah. Yeah. I have no experience with the writing piece. I've thought about it, but I'm like, you're right though. Like, I think I feel, and it's funny, we're talking about shame, but I feel like this need to like do all the things right now, all at the same time. And then when I think about slowing down, there's like shame attached to that, because I'm like, no, we always got to go. We always got to produce, So it's like, I find shame wrapped up in a lot of things, even if it feels small. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I call it self-deprecation, which I'm pretty much the master of that, although I have worked on that over the years and I'm much better than I was before. But it is amazing the way that we can sabotage ourselves in thinking that, like, instead of saying, this might be a really interesting experience to try and write a book, but I'm not going to write a book right away. I'm just going to make some notes. I'm just going to, write down a couple of stories and just, put it in the back of the computer somewhere and save it and just play with it, rather than saying, I've got to do it now. And there is so much pressure on us, I think, as a society. You've got to do it now.
Well, yeah. And then we circle right back to boundaries, because if we held boundaries around our time and space and energy, then those pressures might feel less, or we could actually look at what feels good for us at this moment, as opposed to like kind of worrying about the future, or feeling like I got to produce all the time, or those kinds of things.
So boundaries, you feel like that's probably the first most important step?
Yeah. With all of my clients, that's usually where we first start. And it doesn't even matter really what somebody is coming in with to talk about or to work on. I think boundaries is the best tool for like a baseline tool to start with.
Do you find that a lot of your clients, or a lot of people that you talk to, are like I was, with the very porous boundaries?
Yeah. And some people don't even know what a boundary is, like what it looks like. So I work a lot on language around boundaries, and kind of how to, especially how to engage with somebody who might not be able to hear the boundary, or is used to not having boundaries with you. So if you go to set one with them, they might not be able to respect the boundary at first. So I work a lot on language, and kind of, if you have the awareness of how shame is impacting you, and you can set boundaries within that, you kind of then have a full set of tools to explain your needs, or express your feelings, or that kind of stuff.
And you really nailed it. I love the fact that you start talking about language and how important language is. Not only how we talk to other people, but what we tell ourselves.
Mhm.
And so is that maybe the next step, or is that part of it, or is that just incorporated in the boundaries?
I think all the above. I mean, the way that you talk to yourself is important as well, especially with shame, because for an example, let's say if I get a message from society that I am not allowed to take time off, for example, but I desperately need to because I'm burnt out, I'm going to feel stuck in shame because I'm going to feel like my need isn't valid. I'm going to feel like I am being told that I should be able to produce more and I can't, so I must not be good enough. Like I'm going to have a lot of that internal dialogue happening. And if I'm not able to say, hold on, where's this coming from? Does it actually matter? Is this a rule that I want to, ascribe to? Then if I'm not asking those questions, I'm just going to autopilot through my burnout. But if I start to question those things, I might be able to find something that aligns more with what I'm needing.
I was raised in a tribe where you never turned down work, so I would work my senior year, my junior and senior year in high school. I was working at a shopping mall and a department store. And I was always told, if they call you to work a shift, you never turn it down. And so that was like, okay. So, I missed a couple of parties and things, but it was okay because I was working and I didn't turn it down. And it's amazing how that then just continued on through my professional career until finally it was like, I can't do this anymore.
Well, yeah. And so with boundaries, telling work no is a boundary. Telling yourself it's okay that I say no is a internal boundary. And telling maybe your family, hey, this isn't the best for me is also a boundary. So that's why I feel like boundaries is such a great tool, because you can also use it in a lot of different ways.
And I have another question about that, because do you ever work with people or have somebody come in who is resistant to establishing boundaries because it's so foreign to them, they've never done it before, or they feel that if they create these boundaries and they stick to them, then maybe, other people will just not like them, or they'd be mad at them, and then there you go back to the shame.
Sure. I don't think I've ever had anyone who's resistant per se, but I've definitely had people that are fearful. And so their progress around boundaries is slow, and that's okay. Because if you jump full force into something you're not ready for, it's the chances of it backfiring on you are big. And then that's just going to reconfirm that you shouldn't set boundaries. But yeah, I've definitely had people struggle with, even if I give the exercise of just write down some boundaries you would say to your sister, right? I've had people like go to do that homework and they just can't even write it down. Like the thought of writing it down is too much. And so we just slow it down and we go through, like maybe they practice with me and just me once a week. And then, eventually they'll grow this, I don't know, maybe comfort level on how they can eventually share it with other people. But yeah, I mean, it's tough sometimes.
Yeah, it really is tough. But I love the fact that you're also talking about slowing down, because if we try and make a big change in our lives and we do try and do it quickly, or we do it, all at once, number one, it's really intimidating. It's terrifying, and it's not going to stick. So the smaller changes that you can make, it's baby steps.
Yeah. Well, and my other piece of advice there is also maybe try to express boundaries with people who feel safer in your life, or somebody that like if I say this to them, I know that they'll at least hear me. As opposed to just going for probably the person that you're in therapy for, you know, like,
Yeah, good point.
so I often tell people, you know, practice your boundaries with your friends or with, you know, if you're close to your siblings but if your partner or your parents are like the main people that you need to set boundaries with, they're the hardest ones. Don't start there. Because if you try it and it doesn't go well, your brain is going to go, see, I told you, your fear is accurate. Don't do that. But if you have a friend that you trust and you can even say, hey, I got to practice boundaries so I can learn how to talk about them, then do it that way first and just kind of practice the language and get familiar with that.
The fear around doing something like that it's pretty intense.
Sure. There's a lot of risk.
Oh, absolutely. Not only, you know, with family or, you know, your boss or, you know, somebody else at work. I mean, there is an awful lot of risk of being able to set strong boundaries. So I love the way that you're putting it, of using, you know, a good friend or somebody who's going to be, you know, receptive and who isn't going to shut you down right away, that you can practice, because it's almost like building a muscle, courage muscle.
Yeah. And similarly with starting with a safe person, you don't have to set every boundary ever at the beginning either. Like it can be something small versus something that feels riskier. You know, you bring up work, right? Like maybe you can set a boundary around, you know, no, I need to be able to take my full 30-minute lunch, but maybe you're not setting a boundary around something else that feels more, you know, risky. So yeah, I definitely, with any kind of therapy related tool or practice, I encourage people to go at a pace that feels comfortable, because we don't want to create barriers to moving forward.
So there's one more thing I want to bring up with the boundaries, and that's creating boundaries for yourself within yourself. Because I think that that's a really big part of it too, is just limiting yourself and saying, no, this is what I am going to do. This is what I'm not going to do. And trying to do that for yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the practice is similar to what I was speaking to with other people, but I think a difference there is also learning what aligns best with what you're wanting. So if there's a goal you want to meet or a need that's not met, or you just feel like you're not aligning with your values in some way, I think that's more where the internal goals internal boundaries would be.
Then this also ties into, I think, one of the things that we mentioned back and forth when we were just emailing each other and talking about your wonderful dog and dog, how much we love dogs. We can get onto that too. And that is finding your voice. And a lot of people have such a hard time to really find their voice and stand their ground. And I know how much I struggled with that too in my life. And once I was able to find that sweet spot where, you know, I would be able to stand my ground, find my voice, and speak for myself in a way that was very powerful, but not, you know, power doesn't mean yelling and screaming at people.
Right.
Just, yeah, I mean, everybody can do that.
I mean, yeah, I think it ties in well with the boundary conversation, because, you know, part of using your voice is being able to feel like you can take up the space to voice something. So if it's voicing a boundary, or if it's voicing, you know, on behalf of a population, or, you know, advocating really for yourself or others, I really think it takes knowing where your shame lies and knowing how much it maybe holds you back. And then just kind of working on dismantling that. So for example, with body shame stuff, my husband and I both have it. We didn't realize we both had it until I started working on it. And now I can point out his and I can point out mine, which I'm sure he loves.
I was just going to say that. I'm sure he just loves living with you. It's like,
yes,
my husband, he calls me the posture police.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, well, if I'm the posture police, obviously I'm not very good at it because I still have to keep reminding you.
Right. So with both of our body shames kind of, interacting with each other, there would be moments where one of us would shame each other for something and we didn't even know it was happening.
Wow.
But as soon as I had awareness of language that's said or ways that we look at each other or just things that were going on, then I could start breaking that down and voicing to him, hey, that hurt my feelings. Or sometimes it required more like assertiveness and saying, don't talk about that. So I think with using your voice, there are ways to kind of assess how shame is preventing you from using your voice. And then kind of after you can break that down, you can learn how to speak up for what's not feeling right.
You also talked about one of my favorite topics, and that is awareness. Awareness is the key to everything, no matter what it is that you're trying to change in your life.
Well, yeah, because if you don't know you need it or you don't know something's going on, you can't do anything with it without being aware.
Yeah, you might know that you're miserable.
Right.
Or that something's not right in your life, but you just don't know what it is because you don't have that sense of awareness. So do you have any tools that you use or exercises or practices that people can train their awareness?
That one's always tricky because I automatically say, go to a professional who can help you with that. But outside of that, I would say, if something's bothering you, I always find it easier to jot it down somewhere. Or, I mean, you don't have to. I think sometimes when I say journaling, sometimes people are put off by that because they're like, well, that sounds like a lot. Same with meditation, but it doesn't have to be that. So, but I think a lot of times we are so stuck in our heads and our feelings are so stuck in our bodies that if we can take 5 minutes to just put the thoughts and feelings somewhere else on paper, in your computer, in your phone, whatever, it might give you some clarity.
Thanks again for bringing that up because all of that is really good. Journaling, I feel the same way. It's like, I can't journal. And people would tell me, well, you need to write this down. You need to get a journal. You need to start journaling. It's such a healing practice. And I did not find it healing at all.
Yeah.
So one day I was just feeling, like, oh gosh, I just wanted to rant at the world. And I started I just wrote a few words and they weren't pretty. But I felt better. So it is a way of getting it out. So when you talk about journaling, it doesn't, for the listeners, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to write yourself, your whole biography. Right. It doesn't have to be eloquent or elegant. It has to just be something that you can, as a friend of mine would say, and she's a writer, just barf it out. And it's for you. It's not for anybody else. And if you want to, go ahead and burn it if when you're done, to make sure that nobody's going to see it. It doesn't really matter. But there's something in your brain that really, the process of writing something down, even with pen to paper, is really very therapeutic and changes some of the pathways in your brain. So I think that's a wonderful tool.
Yeah. And if you don't want to write, go somewhere that you can be alone and talk it out or yell it out. Or, I'm a fan of be in your car and just go say what you need to say and then go back inside. It's because similar to what I said earlier with how our body stores shame, it's that same concept with our thoughts. And it's just going to keep bugging us if we don't do something with it.
Yeah. So tell us, okay, let's just talk about this. I just skipped a step here because when we're talking about finding your voice, there was something else that you said that I thought was really, really a beautiful thing to hear when you're talking about, even if you're advocating for others, because it's a really good feeling to be able to speak for others when they can't speak for themselves.
Yeah, I think sometimes especially the last couple of years, I feel like this has come up a lot more of like people wanting to advocate for others or advocate with others, but not really knowing how. And one thing that I have come to be more comfortable with. Even I say that because as I'm about to tell you this, I'm like, there's shame there too. So,
Okay.
but what I'm getting at is it doesn't have to be this grand gesture. It doesn't have to be this like you got to be on stage and tell everybody this thing. It can just be in your day-to-day. How do you advocate for people or beliefs or things, you know, that you value? So I do that every day when I work with my clients. I do that every time I have a guest on my podcast and we talk about shame. You know, it's that, I guess, feeling like what you're doing is enough if it feels small. And I think a lot of times this comes up around, you know, using your voice for yourself and others, that there's shame around, yeah, but I'm not doing enough, or I could be doing more. But if the shame is preventing you from doing anything at all, you know, then maybe start small.
It goes back to those little baby steps. So, well, thank you for that. So now we're going to talk about how you do advocate for other people using the podcast and through the podcast. So I just love the name of your show.
Oh, thanks.
The Shame Rebel. So I would love to know how you came up with that name. I
Sure.
can I know where the shame came from, but the rebel, yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how I felt when I started learning how to drop the shames I had. Was I felt like a rebel. I felt like I was rebelling against diet culture and against family messages and against social expectations. Like a lot of the things that I was trying to unlearn felt like a rebellious act. And so with shame, that's kind of where I feel like people find their progress, is when they give themselves permission to rebel against it.
Ooh, that's good.
Thanks.
You're a warrior. That's what it is. It's the warrior spirit coming up, not following the crowd. You're doing your own thing. And it's, I don't care what's going to happen. I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah. Which is so funny because I know that the Katie probably even just 3 or 4 years ago would be like, wow, really? I didn't know I could get there.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another good point, because I think that we don't realize how much we really do have inside of us, how much potential and how much personal growth that we really have available to us when we follow the right track or the right path. And it's never too late to be able to change directions or to improve yourself and to just get rid of the shame, get rid of the self, denigration, all that other stuff. It can be done.
Yeah. And that's what I tell all of my clients too, is, you already possess the ability to do the tools I'm going to teach you, or you already know what is going to be best for you or benefit you. I'm just guiding you to get you there, or I'm providing the worksheet on this topic that we're learning, but you already know how, so it's that, like, everybody's got that potential or they've got the skills. They just need somebody to help them grow those
We've
things.
just been suppressing the skills and that knowledge for so many years. And a lot of that comes from our own negative self-talk, but a lot of it comes from the things that we learn. Don't compliment yourself, don't promote yourself. You have to, all the other stuff that we're told along the way. And I won't get into that because we're going to be here all day if we do that. That could be another title for your book. So I'm giving you all kind of ideas. I'm just running your life, I guess. So, or planning your life. So how can people find your podcast?
Sure. So I have an Instagram, which is, I believe, just at Shame Rebel. And then there is a website that's shamerebelpodcast.com.
Okay, great. And I will have all of that included in the description of the podcast. So
perfect.
People can find that, but I always really like for the guests to be able to give their links and, in their own voice. It's just kind of pretty cool. So is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you would like to talk about, or any other points that you would like to cover? Maybe tips for the audience or any other pointers?
Oh, I think that's the hard part with shame, is you really could talk about it all day. So I can't off the top of my head think of things at the moment, but what I will say is, if you are interested in knowing more about shame, Brene Brown is a really good resource. She's got books and TED Talks and all kinds. She has a podcast too, but she's a really good place to start if you want some basic like shame stuff, especially around language. But yeah, so she's a good resource.
Okay. And about boundaries as well. I know there are tons and tons of books on boundaries, and I have at least one of them, as you know, was a gift from my girlfriend. Yeah. And there's another one, and it's not on boundaries, but it kind of indirectly is. It's Emotional Vampires. I don't know if you've ever read that one.
No, I haven't.
It's a really good one because the guy that wrote it actually a PhD in psychology, and he has an incredible sense of humor.
Good.
And that's
we need that.
Yes, indeed. And that always is something that I can relate to. So one last thing I do want you to mention is just we do share a mutual love of dog.
Yeah.
So you've got one.
I do. Yeah. I have a Shepherd Husky mix. Her name is Leah. She's named after Princess Leia, but not quite, because I wouldn't let my husband go that far. But yeah, she will be turning 8 at the end of this month.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, I proudly wear my badge of dog mom. So she's my baby.
Yeah. Well, I wear my badge of dogaholic.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. It's every time I run into a dog, I see another dog. It's like, like I've never seen a dog before. And I make I look like an idiot. No, look at the baby, but I just love dogs. I just love them so much.
I have a sticker on the back of my car that says, "Tell your dog I say hi." So yeah, and same when we go on walks, like I never look at the person that's walking the dog. I'm just always, yeah. So
we have this great canal, Highline Canal, when we lived in a townhouse and had 3 dogs. So I would walk the canal at least twice a day with my 3 dogs. And, we would have wonderful conversations with these people. We knew each other for like years, and we would talk and talk and talk. We knew the dog's name, but we didn't even know each other's names. It was so funny.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I know. I love it. It's like, so-and-so's mom, just really crazy. Right. Well, Katie, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it. Wonderful tips, great conversation, and just thank you so much for being here.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And make sure you tell Leah I said hi.
Oh, I will. She's probably right outside the door waiting. So
now, I thought I might have heard some scratching in the background. I'm sure she wanted to come in and say hello to me.
She actually, so my husband just got home. He got home in the middle of this, and I heard her bark. So I bet you she's with him right now, but she could be, I don't know.
Well, mine, I didn't hear any barking. And mine have a tendency to burst into spontaneous renditions of the song of my people, which means they get into howling contests. And so I always have to have my husband, in charge of, please make sure they don't go into that howling contest.
Right.
So it's pretty funny. Okay, Katie, thanks again so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you as well. And boy, think about some of the things that Katie talked about today, the power of shame and what it can do to us, and how empowering it is to be able to get out of that walk of shame and set some boundaries, get that courage muscle going and talk very nicely to yourself, because self-denigration is not a good thing. And that is the way of the Femininja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the Femininja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.